Spring, 1945, Hereford, Texas. Irma Klein stepped off the Red Cross transport with a rustle of her gray skirt. Her boots hit the dry American dust, and her pride stayed intact. She was a Luftnachrichtenhelferin, trained, loyal, dignified. Germany's war was collapsing, but she was not. Ahead, American soldiers stood with lazy smiles and rolled sleeves. Music played from a tinny loudspeaker. It wasn't a battlefield. It looked like a Sunday picnic. A young American nurse handed her a bottle of Coca-Cola, cold, sweating in the heat. The girl couldn't have been more than 20. Her freckles barely faded. Irma squinted. "They let their women serve in uniform?" she whispered to Hilda beside her. "Like men?" She didn't wait for an answer. The nurse pointed to a wooden table stacked with paper pamphlets. Irma grabbed one, almost out of curiosity. On the cover was a woman in a wide-brimmed hat, casting a vote. The headline read, "25 Years of Freedom. American Women Vote Since 1920. Irma blinked. That couldn't be right. She turned the page, and the world she thought she understood began to shift. Winter, 1944. Near Kassel, Germany. Snow clung to the branches like ash. The airfield stank of oil, wet canvas, and roasted turnips. Irma Klein wrapped her wool scarf tighter and stepped into the bunker. She was 24. Quick with numbers, fluent in Morse, and proud to be part of the Luftnachrichtenhelferin, the women's auxiliary of the Luftwaffe. Her job, decode Allied chatter, track bomber groups, and hold the line from behind a desk. But she wore the eagle insignia with pride. Kassel was still burning. The last raid had left 10,000 dead. But that only hardened their resolve. "We will hold," her commanding officer had said. "They fight with chaos. We fight with order." The girls laughed in the barracks that night. One recited a propaganda joke from the newspaper. "How do you distract an American woman? Put a mirror on a tank." Irma laughed too, even if it stung a little. She had no mirror, only duty, only Germany. By January, they were sleeping in shifts. The RAF came at dusk. The Americans came at noon. Firebombs turned factories into red lakes. But the field commanders still barked orders, still clung to maps like they meant something. Irma kept working, hands trembling, eyes dry. She tracked the B-17 formations. They kept getting bigger. She had never seen a single American woman. Not in the war films, not in the reports. And that made it easier to believe the joke. They must all be wives or dancers, naive, pampered, slow. When the order came to evacuate, Irma didn't ask why. The trucks were full of wounded. The stations were chaos. Yet the Red Cross train that took her west was strangely calm. Clean linens, hot broth. A nurse who spoke polite German. Irma narrowed her eyes at the woman, blonde, efficient, American. She thought of her older brother, dead at Kursk, of Hans, her fiancé, missing on the Eastern Front. And here was a woman, tending to the enemy, humming through clean corridors. Something didn't make sense. As the train moved farther west, she saw fewer craters, fewer ruins. Then, vast farmland, tractors, windmills, rows of Coca-Cola signs along the road. Irma stared in disbelief. She turned to the girl across the aisle. "Is this France?" "No," the girl said. "This is Texas." That night, Irma lay awake, staring at the bunk ceiling. How could the Americans afford so much? How could they spare women to serve soup while bombing Dresden? By the time the sun rose, Irma felt her pride fray. Not break, not yet. But something inside had shifted. Because if this was how the enemy treated their women, what else had they been wrong about? The bus doors hissed open under a cloudless Texas sky. Heat pressed down like a wool blanket. Dry, bright, blinding. Irma stepped off and squinted. This wasn't a prison. It looked more like a college campus. Barbed wire framed the camp, yes, but inside were trees, barracks painted white, even a garden. Men in uniform lounged with books. Some smoked pipes. One waved casually at a guard. She saw no guns raised, no dogs, no shouting. Behind her, Hilda muttered, "This is captivity?" A sergeant called roll with a calm voice. "Ladies, you'll be assigned quarters and examined by medical staff. There are rules, but no one's here to mistreat you." No one scoffed, but Irma felt a ripple of silent disbelief. The barracks smelled like soap and dry wood. Each bunk had 2 pillows, a folded towel, a small booklet labeled Camp Code of Conduct, in German. Inside the mess hall, posters lined the wall. One read, "Every worker a soldier, every woman an engine." It showed a woman, young, smiling, holding a wrench beside a tank tread. Irma frowned. The proportions were wrong. Women didn't work with machines. Not in any serious way. She sat down with her tray. It had meat, warm bread, even an orange. Where did they get oranges in wartime? Later that week, she joined the mandatory English lessons. The classroom was simple, but full. Chalkboard, wooden desks, a radio in the corner playing faint jazz. Their teacher was a woman, middle-aged, gray hair in a bun, wearing trousers. She moved with quiet authority, introduced herself as Mrs. Walker. "We begin with vocabulary," she said. "Today's word is democracy." The chalk squeaked the letters on the board. DEMOCRACY. Irma wrote it down without thinking, then paused. She remembered a lecture back home where democracy had been called a disease. At break, Irma lingered by the canteen. A group of young American women were unpacking crates, typewriters, pencils, reams of paper. One laughed. Her laugh was full, loud, free. Irma stared too long. One of them noticed and smiled. She felt a strange flush rise to her cheeks, part shame, part anger, and something else she couldn't name. Because these women didn't look soft. They looked strong and completely unafraid. One afternoon, Mrs. Walker entered the classroom, holding a small stack of papers. Her eyes twinkled behind her glasses. "Today," she said, "we'll read something a little different." She passed the pages down each row, pamphlets printed in clean serif font with photographs and bold American headlines. Irma glanced down at hers. On the cover, a woman in a plain dress stood before a ballot box. Her hand reached forward, mid-motion, a vote in her grasp. The title read, 25 Years of Women's Suffrage in the United States. Irma blinked. 25 years? She raised her hand, hesitant. Is this a story? A fiction? Mrs. Walker smiled. It's history. The room grew quiet as pages turned, line by line, fact by fact. 1920, the 19th Amendment ratified. By 1944, 40 million American women eligible to vote. Irma read slower now. Sentences started to twist in her mind. During the war, American women not only voted, they worked in defense plants, designed aircraft, served as pilots, engineers, and elected officials. A snort broke the silence. One of the German women, Greta, leaned back and rolled her eyes. Propaganda, she muttered. Women building airplanes. What's next? Leading armies. Mrs. Walker didn't answer right away. She walked to the radio, turned the knob. Static gave way to a steady voice. We mark the 25th year of women's suffrage with pride in our shared strength. It was Eleanor Roosevelt, speaking calmly, confidently, like no woman Irma had ever heard. After class, Irma stood near the mess hall, pamphlet folded tight in her fist. A male POW, Fritz, formerly a flak gunner, leaned against the fence nearby. "Can you believe it?" he smirked. "They let their women vote." Irma nodded slowly. "And run factories." Fritz spat in the dust. No wonder their machines fall apart. But she didn't laugh. She remembered the orange, the posters, the typewriters, and that voice on the radio. So different from Goebbels's shrill broadcasts. So calm. So certain. That evening, Irma sat on her bunk and unfolded the pamphlet again. She traced one photograph with her fingertip, a line of women casting ballots beside men. No fear, no sneers, no permission needed. Hilda climbed up to the top bunk above her. "Still thinking about that nonsense?" Irma didn't answer, because in that moment, she wasn't so sure it was nonsense anymore. She had spent her life learning what women were not allowed to do. Now she was learning, too late, what American women had done for decades. And the realization was beginning to hurt. March 1945. Night fell quiet in Hereford. Wind brushed through the pine trees. A screen door creaked open, then shut. Somewhere, distant jazz floated from the guards' barracks. Soft, defiant, American. Irma sat at the edge of her bunk, a candle flickering beside her. She opened her diary. Not the one they issued, her real one, sewn into the lining of her coat. Her handwriting trembled on the page. They smile too easily, like they've never feared men. She paused, then underlined the word never. That afternoon, during kitchen duty, she had watched two American women, one in a gray dress, the other in pants, talking to a group of male guards over coffee. They argued, not angrily, openly, about gasoline prices, about Roosevelt's fourth term, about who would rebuild Europe faster, Ford or General Motors. And the men? They listened, even laughed. Irma dropped a spoon in the sink. The clang rang too loud in her ears. She had never spoken that way to an officer, not even to her father. Back in the barracks, she stared at the pamphlet again. One quote circled in red pencil. "A woman's vote is not a gift. It is a right." She shut the book. A right? In Germany, rights were given or taken. Nothing was owed to a woman. Irma lay in bed, eyes open to the dark ceiling. Memory rolled in, uninvited. Her mother, silent at the dinner table, folding napkins just so. Her school teacher, dismissed for asking why women couldn't join the city council. And Lotta, her childhood friend, who disappeared after writing a letter about rations. She whispered to herself, almost daring the night to answer. What if they were right? Then she turned over and wrote the next line in her diary, with shaking fingers. We thought obedience was strength, but perhaps silence was our real defeat. Rain tapped gently on the tin roof. In the barracks, the lights were off, except for one small lamp, low and warm. Irma sat cross-legged on her bunk. Beside her, Hilda rolled a cigarette with slow, practiced fingers. Across from them, Elsa leaned against the wall, arms folded tight. None of them could sleep. Outside, an American truck rumbled past, tires hissing over wet gravel. Inside, the silence thickened until Hilda broke it. I used to laugh at them, she said. The posters, the pants, the women with tools. She exhaled smoke through her nose. But now I wonder if we laughed because we were afraid. Irma didn't respond. She traced the edge of the pamphlet still hidden under her pillow. Its corners were soft from folding, unfolding. Elsa scoffed. Afraid of what? They're brainwashed. All this freedom. It's just disorder, wrapped in slogans. No, Irma said, voice quieter than she expected. It's more than slogans. They sat in silence again. Then Hilda whispered, You remember Marburg? How they made that girl kneel just for speaking? Irma nodded. She said she wanted to study engineering, Hilda added. They sent her to a re-education camp. Elsa looked away. Irma bit her lip. Here, the engineers are women. She paused. And no one kneels. The rain stopped. A breeze crept through the window, carrying a scent Irma couldn't place. Something foreign, almost sweet. She wondered if it was the trees or freedom. She pulled out the pamphlet again and turned to the last page. It showed a map of the United States. Dotted cities, voting centers, photographs of women standing in line, not waiting to be told, not waiting to be chosen, just choosing. Later that night, when Elsa was asleep, Hilda leaned closer. If we had been born here, she whispered, do you think we would have been different? Irma turned her head slowly. She didn't blink. I think, she said, we'd be dangerous. Hilda chuckled once, a short, broken sound, and then the two of them sat in silence, eyes open, waiting for dawn. Not fearing it anymore, just wondering what it might bring. May 8th, 1945. Victory in Europe Day. At dawn, the camp loudspeakers cracked to life. Static filled the air for a second. Then a voice, warm and steady, spread across the barracks. This is Eleanor Roosevelt. Irma sat up. Today we remember the cost of war. We honor those who served, and we build a peace worth keeping. Women's voices. Clear, controlled, not shrill, not ornamental. They didn't ask permission to speak. They simply spoke, and the camp listened. By noon, every POW had gathered in the main yard. A screen had been set up. American newsreels projected against a white wall. Irma stood in the second row, arms folded tight. The footage rolled. B-24 Liberators, dozens, roared off the production line. Women in headscarves and coveralls, fitted engines, welded frames, calibrated bomb sights. Factories ran 24 hours a day. The narrator's voice echoed, "At Willow Run, one plane every hour." Over 400,000 women joined the aviation industry alone. Irma stared. Not a parade of exceptions, not poster girls. This was a system. Then came the faces. Names. Ruth Elder, aeronautical engineer. Dorothy Lamore, wartime production spokeswoman. Nancy Love, ferry pilot, over 900 flight hours. Women in goggles, in control towers, in Congress. Irma's jaw clenched. She looked around. Some German women shifted on their feet. Others frowned. But most just watched. Something hard and ancient was dissolving. An American soldier walked past behind them. Young, tan, not much older than Irma. He smiled at her, friendly, not mocking, not possessive. "My wife works at Lockheed," he said. Irma blinked. "She builds airplanes?" "Better than me," he grinned. "My daughter wants to be a pilot." He tipped his cap and walked away, like it was nothing. Like that sentence wasn't a thunderclap in her mind. That night, Irma didn't write in her diary. She just sat beneath the bunk window and stared at the sky, wide, starless, American. She had believed strength came from obedience, that women could only endure, never decide. But now she had seen something else. A nation where mothers built the machines that destroyed her cities, where daughters flew the planes that broke her sky. And they did it not by hiding, but by standing beside the men. Down the hall, a woman began to hum, a tune Irma didn't know. It sounded like jazz, or hope, or maybe both. And Irma, for the first time, felt something she had no word for. Not defeat, not shame, just this, a sudden terrible envy for a life she was never allowed to live. 2 weeks later, Irma was assigned to library duty. The camp library surprised her. It was larger than some she'd seen in Germany before the war. Clean, ordered shelves, rows of books in English, some translated into German, newspapers, maps, even military manuals. A Red Cross worker handed her a ledger and smiled. "We log all materials by number. Makes replacement easy." Irma nodded. Her fingers brushed the card catalog. Alphabetical, standardized, precise. Nothing was improvised. That evening, she stumbled upon a thick binder left on the table. Its cover read, "Logistics in Wartime Production, Red Ball Express and the Willow Run System." She opened it. On the first page, a photo of the Ford motor plant. Dozens of B-24 Liberators rolled down an assembly line, wings, fuselage, engines, all separate, synchronized. Underneath, a number. One bomber every 59 minutes. She turned the page. Charts, schedules, hundreds of plants across states, each building just one part. Women accounted for 42% of the labor. Every shift timed, every bolt pre-counted. Not improvisation, integration. Another folder described the Red Ball Express. Thousands of trucks driven by African-American soldiers, mostly at night, hauling fuel and ammo faster than the German army could retreat. Irma swallowed hard. She thought of her brother Carl, stuck in a panzer division without fuel, pulling engines with horses. Here, in America, fuel didn't run out. It flowed. A sergeant had once told her Germany's strength came from its culture, obedience, hierarchy, legacy. But this was different. America's strength wasn't tradition. It was design, not just in machines, but in people. A woman replaced a man. A truck replaced a rail line. A modular wing replaced a broken supply chain. No panic, just process. She walked past the mechanic's shed later that day. A young American woman was tuning an engine, sleeves rolled, hair tied back, grease on her face. She didn't flinch when sparks flew. Irma paused to watch. The woman turned, noticed her, and nodded once. Not kindly, not dismissively. Just as an equal. It made Irma's chest tighten. Because deep down she realized they weren't winning because they had more. They were winning because they made better use of what they had. Back in the barracks, she tried to explain. "They're not stronger," she said to Hilda, "but they run like a clock." Hilda shook her head. "They run like a factory." Irma nodded and whispered, almost to herself, "With women as gears." Summer 1945. Heat shimmered off the Texas dirt. Irma sat alone in the shade outside the camp library, flipping through a small translated booklet. It was the United States Constitution, printed in German by the Red Cross. On the inside cover, someone had underlined a phrase, in red pencil. "We the people." She read the words again. Slowly this time. Not as a captive, but as a witness. Back home, Irma had memorized the Führer's speeches, the party creeds, the marching songs. She'd learned to repeat without asking, to serve without speaking. Here, everything was reversed. At the bottom of each page were signatures, men and women, debating laws, revising ideas, choosing leaders. They had built their system on disagreement, not fear. Inside the library, an American volunteer, a woman named Rose sorted a stack of magazines. Irma approached. "What does this mean?" she asked, tapping a paragraph. Rose glanced at it. "That's about the Bill of Rights. Freedom of speech? Freedom to vote? Freedom to criticize your president?" "To criticize?" Irma asked. "Publicly?" Rose nodded, amused. "Of course. That's how we keep them honest." Irma stood silent, then whispered, "We were punished for questions, even quiet ones." That night in the barracks, Elsa scoffed at the booklet. Constitution or not, they still dropped bombs on children. Irma didn't argue. She simply replied, "And then they handed me this." She held the book in her lap like it was fragile. They didn't break us. They offered us something better. Later, Hilda asked her the question no one dared. "If they gave you the vote, would you take it?" Irma hesitated. Her mouth opened, but no words came. She thought of her sister Greta, who had never questioned anything, who had disappeared after refusing a factory assignment, who had always said, "It's better not to think." Then she remembered that photo. The American girl in a dress, smiling as she slipped her vote into the box. Irma looked up. "Yes," she said, quiet, certain. "Yes, I would." That night, a storm rolled in. Lightning lit the sky in long, silent flashes. The windows shook gently in their frames. Irma didn't sleep. She imagined a different version of herself, in another country, another time, walking alone to a voting booth. No guards, no fear, just paper, and a choice. She knew now, America didn't just produce weapons. It produced conviction, and conviction, once seen, could never be unseen. Summer scorched the Texas plains. Camp Hereford buzzed with rumors of surrender, of trials, of a world rebuilding itself without asking for permission. Irma stood by the bulletin board near the mess hall. A new flyer had gone up. It wasn't a pamphlet or policy notice, just a single page of numbers, typed in bold. At the top, wartime production comparison, Axis versus Allies. Below that, columns. Irma read every line. U.S. aircraft produced, 1941-1945, over $300,000. German aircraft, 119,307. U.S. tanks, 88,410. German tanks, 46,857. Women in U.S. workforce by 1945, over 6 million. Her breath caught. They hadn't just outnumbered Germany. They had outorganized it. They had built an empire not from conquest, but from blueprints, ballots, and belief. In the library, Irma found a Stars and Stripes clipping, left open by a guard. The headline read, 2 million gallons burned in 48 hours to trap German columns. A colonel was quoted beneath, "We burned fuel like it was air. Because we had it, they didn't." Irma remembered a bitter winter in Kassel. Engines dead, cannons useless, horses starving. And here, Americans burned gasoline just to trap them in place. Another POW once said, "They lit their paths with fire. We lit ours with candles." That week, a new POW arrived. Thin, trembling, eyes sunken. He had come from a Luftwaffe unit, routed in Belgium. He spoke with bitterness, but no arrogance. "They didn't beat us with guns," he said. "They beat us with factories." He sat in the shade, opened a can of cold beans, and whispered like it was confession. "I lost a division trying to hold a river crossing. They sent trucks, not soldiers. Trucks." Irma didn't speak much anymore. She had seen enough. But one morning she passed a group of American Red Cross workers unloading boxes, labeled neatly voting kits, provisional ballots, educational flyers. One of them noticed her gaze. "We're sending them to Germany," the woman said. Irma raised an eyebrow. "Even the women?" she asked. The workers smiled, especially the women. That night in her journal, Irma wrote her last entry. Not a lament, not a defense, just 3 lines. They built 300,000 planes. We built silence. They gave their women tools. We gave ours obedience. And that's why we lost, before the war even began. 6 years later, 1951, Berlin. The city still wore its scars, hollow buildings, sidewalks stitched with gravel, walls charred like old bones. But that morning, something felt different. Irma stood in line near the Rathaus Schöneberg, wrapped in a brown coat, hands hidden in her sleeves. All around her, silence, motion, breath. No salutes, no orders, just people, waiting. Ahead, an American soldier handed out ballots to each person, calm, steady, routine, as if it had always been this way. When it was Irma's turn, he looked her in the eyes, smiled, and said in clear German, "Your voice matters today." She took the ballot with both hands, light, almost weightless. Her fingers trembled. Behind her, a young woman held a baby. Ahead, an old man leaned on a cane. No uniforms, no shouting, just dignity. Irma stepped into the booth. She stared at the paper, names, parties, choices. For the first time in her life, no one told her what to write. A gust of wind pushed through the alley as she exited. A banner flapped above the square. Democracy begins with a single choice. Irma stopped. Her mind flickered back to Hereford, the American nurse, the pamphlet, Eleanor Roosevelt's voice on the radio. That line, "A woman's vote is not a gift, it is a right." Now it was hers. She looked down at the ink on her thumb. Not a stain, a symbol. She never spoke to Hilda again, never returned to her old town. The past had burned too many bridges, but she carried one photo, a faded black and white of a woman in a factory jumpsuit, smiling beside a plane. Not propaganda, proof. And in the quiet of her new apartment, as Berlin rebuilt itself one stone at a time, Irma kept a single item above her writing desk. That same American pamphlet, folded, worn, edges frayed, but legible. 25 years of women's vote. She had once laughed at it. Now, it was the reason she still believed the future was worth showing up for.